He looked at my shoes and laughed. $10, worn and plain, nothing special. My own son chuckled, mocking me in front of others, calling them cheap and embarrassing. But what he didn't know was that sometimes the simplest things hide the greatest treasures. Inside those shoes, tucked away where no one thought to look, was an inheritance worth $100,000. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated because of how something looked on the outside? Share your story below. Now let's step into today's tale. The teasing began at dinner one evening. My son noticed my shoes. Simple, scuffed a little at the toes. Nothing stylish, nothing new. "Mom," he laughed, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, "did you pick those up at a yard sale? $10? You could at least try to look like you belong." The words stung. He didn't see the long days behind those shoes, the years of walking hallways to work, of budgeting every penny to make sure he and his sister never went without. To him, they were just a cheap pair of shoes. To me, they were comfort, practicality, and a quiet reminder that worth isn't worn on your feet. I smiled softly, brushing off the comment. But inside, I felt the ache only a mother can feel when her child mocks her sacrifices. Around the table, a few relatives chuckled awkwardly, but no one defended me. My son leaned back in his chair, proud of his little joke. I stayed quiet, not out of weakness, but because silence often carries farther than arguments. What he didn't know was that those shoes weren't ordinary. Years ago, when my husband passed, he left me a small envelope. Inside was a check worth $100,000, a life's savings, meant for our children when the time was right. I kept it hidden, not in a bank box or safe, but tucked carefully in the lining of my most ordinary shoes. Why? Because no one ever looked there. No thief, no stranger, and certainly not a son who thought appearances defined worth. Each step I took in those shoes reminded me of my husband's love, of the security we had built, of the patience required to carry something valuable until the moment it was needed. So when my son mocked me that night, I said nothing. I simply slipped the shoes off by the door, as I always did, watching him smirk. He thought he was laughing at my frugality, but really, he was laughing at the very vessel carrying his future. And one day soon, he would learn just how wrong he was. The dinner table wasn't the only time my son made remarks. Over the weeks that followed, his jokes became routine. "Still wearing those old $10 shoes, Mom?" he'd say when I visited his house. "You know, people might start a fundraiser for you if you keep showing up like that." He'd laugh, sometimes even in front of his wife or friends. Each time I smiled politely, biting back the sting in my chest. The boy I had raised, the boy whose shoes I once bought secondhand, just so he wouldn't go barefoot, now mocked me for mine. I could have told him then. I could have revealed the envelope, shown him the figure printed neatly across the check. But I didn't, because I knew if he only respected me after seeing dollar signs, it wouldn't be respect at all. Instead, I let him speak. I let him underestimate me, and in my silence, I found strength. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window with those shoes beside me. I'd touch the worn leather, trace the hidden seam where the envelope was tucked safely away. I'd think of my husband, the way he had worked quietly, steadily, without needing to boast. He had taught me that true value isn't always visible, and that patience often carries the sweetest rewards. So I wore those shoes everywhere, to the grocery store, to church, even to family gatherings where the whispers followed me. "She's frugal to a fault," they'd say. "Can't she treat herself?" But I didn't need their approval. My security was already under my feet. The hardest moment came one afternoon when my son pulled me aside. his tone sharp rather than playful. "Mom, you need to stop embarrassing yourself. I don't know why you insist on dressing like that. It makes you look small." Small. The word lodged in my heart. I wanted to shout, to remind him of the nights I worked double shifts so he could have new sneakers for school, to remind him of the sacrifices his father and I had made to build a foundation he never saw, to remind him that the shoes he mocked had walked through storms he'd never faced. But I didn't. I simply looked at him and said softly, "One day, you'll understand." He rolled his eyes, dismissing me, but as he walked away, I felt a quiet certainty settle inside me. Because one day, the truth wouldn't just be told, it would be shown. And when it was, the laughter that echoed so loudly now would fall silent. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. We were gathered again, family and neighbors filling the living room with chatter. I had baked a pie, set it on the table, and settled quietly in my chair. My son noticed the shoes immediately. He smirked, leaned back, and announced loudly for everyone to hear, "Can you believe my mom is still wearing those $10 shoes? I keep telling her she deserves better, but she just won't listen." A few people chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. His wife looked away embarrassed. My daughter frowned but said nothing. I felt the familiar ache, but this time it was different. I wasn't just hurt. I was ready. I stood slowly, my shoes creaking against the floorboards. "You think they're cheap," I said softly, my voice carrying through the room. "You think they make me small. But you don't know what these shoes carry." The room went silent. My son blinked, caught off guard. "Mom, it's just a joke." "No," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "You've made this joke long enough." I slipped the shoes off, setting them on the table. Gently, I turned one over, fingers moving to the seam only I knew about. With steady hands, I reached inside and pulled out the envelope. Gasps echoed around the room. My son's smirk vanished as I held the envelope up. "This," I said, laying it flat on the table, "is a $100,000 inheritance. Your father's last gift to us. I've carried it with me every day, kept it safe where no one would think to look. In these shoes, you laugh at." He froze, his mouth opening and closing without words. The color drained from his face as I slid the envelope toward him. "You mocked me for wearing them," I continued, my voice trembling with emotion. "But these shoes carried your future. They carried our family's security. Every step I took in them was a step of patience, of protection, of love you never saw." The room stayed quiet, the weight of my words settling heavy. For once, my son couldn't laugh. He couldn't smirk or brush it off. All he could do was stare at the envelope, shame written across his face. I slipped the shoes back on, tying the laces slowly. "Value," I said softly, "isn't always something you can see. Remember that." And then I sat back down, leaving the inheritance resting in front of him, the truth laid bare for everyone to witness. The room sat in stunned silence. The envelope, small and unassuming, seemed to glow on the table. My son, who had laughed the loudest, now looked as if the floor had fallen out from beneath him. He reached for the envelope hesitantly, as though it might burn him. Sliding out the contents, his eyes widened. There it was, one crisp check, neatly folded, dated years ago, with his father's handwriting still alive in the signature. $100,000. His lips parted, but no words came. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, I didn't know." I nodded slowly. "Of course you didn't, because you never asked. You never looked past the surface. You only saw what you wanted to see, a pair of old shoes. You didn't see the sacrifice, the patience, or the love behind them." The weight of my words hung heavy. My daughter wiped a tear from her cheek. Other relatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing they too had laughed along at times. My son set the check down with trembling hands. His bravado had melted away, leaving him small, almost childlike. For the first time in years, I saw not the man puffed up with pride, but the boy I once carried in my arms, the boy who had forgotten the value of what was unseen. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked softly, his voice cracking. I sighed. "Because respect should never depend on a dollar amount. I wanted you to see me for who I am, not what I could give you. And every time you mocked these shoes, you reminded me how little you understood." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, transformative. Around the table, eyes that once darted away from his jokes now turned on him, not me. He was the one shrinking in his seat, not his mother. The power had shifted without me needing to raise my voice. I leaned back, slipping my feet back into the shoes as though to punctuate the moment. "You thought they made me look small," I said gently, "but today they proved just how much they carried." No one laughed, no one smirked. My son stared at the floor, shame pressing down on his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt no sting, no ache from his words. I felt whole, because the truth was out. And with it came a quiet justice that no mocking could erase. In the days that followed, something shifted in my home and in my son. He didn't make jokes anymore. The smirk, once so quick to appear when he saw my shoes, was gone. When he visited, his eyes lingered on them differently, not with mockery, but with memory. The memory of his father's handwriting, the inheritance carried silently in those worn soles, the truth that wealth isn't always measured in what glitters. I noticed the change in small ways. He called more often, not just to check in, but to listen. He asked about my garden, about the stories behind things I kept tucked away. It was as if, for the first time in years, he realized I carried more than he had ever seen. And I too reflected. I thought about all the times I had stayed silent while the mocking laughter echoed. I thought about the sting of being underestimated, the ache of watching my own child measure me by appearances. But now, I saw the power in patience. I saw the strength in letting truth wait for its moment instead of forcing it before its time. Because that moment, when the envelope appeared, had spoken louder than any defense I could have made. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was trust. My husband's trust that I would safeguard his gift until it was needed most. It was love. His last gesture to our family, carried in quiet secrecy. And it was proof that what seems small can carry the weight of everything. My son had mocked me for looking cheap, but he learned that value isn't stitched into leather or printed on price tags. Value lives in the unseen sacrifices, the choices, the hidden treasures waiting beneath the surface. I don't hold bitterness toward him anymore. Instead, I hope he carries this lesson forward, that he looks at people differently, that he never again mistakes simplicity for weakness or frugality for failure. Because life has a way of humbling us, of turning laughter into silence, and silence into wisdom. And as for me, I still wear those shoes, not out of necessity anymore, but out of choice. They remind me of patience, they remind me of love, and they remind me that sometimes the things people mock the most are the very things that hold the greatest power. So here's what I've learned. People often laugh at what they don't understand. My son thought $10 shoes made me small. He thought appearances told the whole story, but hidden inside those shoes was a truth greater than he could imagine. An inheritance worth $100,000, and a lesson no amount of money could buy. Respect should never come from price tags. It should come from the sacrifices we make, the love we give, and the quiet strength we carry even when others can't see it. He mocked me once, but now he knows value isn't always on the surface. Sometimes it's hidden in the most ordinary places. Tell me, have you ever surprised someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments. More tales of quiet justice are on the way.